Hey, welcome to Fathering Our Future, the podcast for dads. I'm Anthony Vandegrift, and I'm not the perfect dad, but every day I am trying to be better. I'm joined with my friend Derrick Weeks today. Derrick, thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So I'm not bringing Derrick on today as a guest for me to interview per se. I'm bringing him more on as a co-host today so that he and I can banter back and forth about our topic, which is going to be overcoming inadequacies and embracing the challenge of fatherhood. That's what we're going to talk about. But I'm going to try and bring Derrick on periodically to help with different things, to provide his opinion in addition to mine. Derrick is, let's just say he's going to be the on-hand scholar of Fathering Our Future.
Right. Right.
What, you're pursuing your master's in divinity right now?
Currently, yes, I'm working towards my MDiv at UGST.
Yep, so you're doing that. You work in ministry at church. It's definitely the path that you're on. So I think it's appropriate for you to kind of be a voice on that. And,
thank you.
And I'll utilize it while I can, while you're still amongst the lowly.
Right.
Before you rise up in the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
So while we've got him, we're going to utilize him. And every time that we talk, I imagine we'll probably bring God into the conversation. We usually don't even have conversations where God doesn't become the central point of it as it is. So, and as I've said before, and I'll say forever, I really don't know how to go about fatherhood without God being a part of it, the central part of it. So anyway, that's what you're going to get with Derrick and myself. And today, like I said, we're talking about overcoming inadequacies and embracing the challenge or embracing the call of fatherhood. So, Derrick, I think, and you can speak to this as well, I think that every father, every man, when they become a dad and they actually start to think about what they're in for, they probably get this sense, I know I had this sense of, I'm not qualified for this. I'm inadequate. Like, there's no way when I look back over my life, and you know much of that, but when you look at it too, to think that, yes, if you were hiring someone for a job of raising a child and you looked at, the resume of my life, would you really think this is the guy that I want raising this little kid to become? I think every dad can probably look at themselves and write out that resume of all your mistakes and all the dumb stuff you did when you were growing up and think, I got this. No problem.
Yeah, there's enough red in our ledger.
Exactly. None of us really are qualified. And every dad is overcome with that sense of, I am inadequate. I'm not qualified to do this. And so that's what we want to speak to. That's what we want to address, because just so you know, you think that you're not alone. You're not the only dad who's inadequate. Welcome to the party. It's all of us. Every single dad is a part of that. And any dads who think that they are adequate or fit to serve in the position, they're going to be a part of our group not too long, because they're going to quickly come to terms and realize that this is really difficult. Being a dad is it's not a piece of cake.
Right.
And I know it's very easy to think, well, lots of people have been there and done that since the beginning of time. Yeah, but it's not easy. There are complexities with fatherhood. And so it helps when you actually realize that you're not alone with the inadequacies. So we're going to talk about ways that we think we can overcome these inadequacies. And we're going to approach it with the perspective of we are embracing the call of fatherhood. And I think that's going to be one of the key takeaways, is to not give up. Because it's very easy to think, okay, I'm not good enough for this, I'm not going to do it. Or I'm not qualified for this job, I'm not even going to apply. It's very easy for us to look at the obstacles stacked against us and to say, I'm just going to camp out here for a little bit. I can't do this. So let's dive into this. The first thing that I think, and that we think that we have to do as fathers, is we have to understand that we have this feeling of inadequacies, but we have to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't deny it. You can't.
Sure.
This isn't a fake it till you make it type thing. This isn't I'm highly underqualified to be a father, but I'm just going to pretend like I'm not. Like that's not the right way to approach it. You definitely have to accept the fact that this is bigger than I am. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, I think it's when you approach it from that place of humility, of not being deserving, not being adequate, that you actually position yourself to change and to grow and to become more of the qualified version of yourself that you need to be.
Correct.
When I think about myself with my kids, I mean, it was definitely I'm not perfect. I still have struggles. Like, there's no way that I need to be the role model that my kids look up to. I mean, that was definitely my perspective. I don't know what it was like for you.
Mm-hmm. No, it was certainly the same. Like every soon-to-be parent, there is moments in which you are overwhelmed by inadequacies. Mm-hmm. Dear God, do we have the money?
Oh, yeah.
Are we at a place vocationally, to handle these rugrats that are getting ready to stay home with us? It's not like your niece or nephew that you have for a couple of hours and then you get tired of them and you can push them back to their parents. Yeah, so you have those. Then you wonder if you have the patience to be able to stay up all night with the kid for several months before they learn to sleep. We know there are many parents that have a real struggle with that, not anger, but that overwhelming sense when you're tired and the kid's crying and you just can't handle it anymore and you're about to break. So you have all these things. So again, finances, where you are in life, your inner dispositions and emotions, all of these things come into play and even more. And it becomes readily apparent that you're simply not adequate. And I think...
Thank you for clearing that up for anyone who thought they might have been adequate.
And so why don't you take a step back and recognize that you're not the only person in the world that feels this way? Everybody does, every mother, every father, and have some peace in that, because your parents felt inadequate, their parents felt inadequate. Right. Mary and Joseph felt inadequate. We're going to get to God, but case in point there was...
We had to raise Jesus.
Yes, they had to raise God himself. So there was that case of inadequacy. So it hits everybody.
Right.
However, I think you can get to a place of acceptance of that inadequacy, and then even a step further, you can go beyond acceptance of that inadequacy. And what I mean by that is any individual who has placed faith in Jesus, the moment that has happened and that faith is then enacted, you become as worthy as Jesus himself. Paul is very clear that when you put your faith in Christ, his value and his worth comes and rests upon you, and now you're no longer alone. You have that very same characteristic of Jesus himself. Now, I'm not saying that answers everything, but if you can accept the fact that you're as worthy as Jesus, that's going to override the doubt and the inadequacy that we all carry.
Right. It helps your self-esteem. Just don't get carried away.
Yeah, don't get carried away. Yeah. So I'm not saying
Be
that
like Jesus.
Yeah. But I am saying that it takes care of that inner turmoil.
Sure.
That you are as valued, you're as loved, and you are as worthy as Jesus himself.
Right.
When you place your faith in him. And from there, you recognize that you're no longer alone. Because God said, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you.
Right.
Now, granted, that was in the context of mission, but as Christians, parenting is a part of that missional vocation.
Yeah.
So he's with you there, ready to guide you and walk with you. So that is probably the first main thing I want to say before we move forward, is that you can find a self-worth in Christ, and that self-worth can then work its way out.
Yeah.
But wisdom must play a part of that working out.
Sure, and that's a really good thing to point out, that yes, you can accept your inadequacies, and you can acknowledge the fact that you're not qualified to be a dad, but you can still find worth in God.
Right. Now, that's not going to be easy at first.
No,
because we all have this.
It's a lifelong process.
It is because that inadequacy works like an operating software. You've had it. It's the language in your head.
Sure.
And if you keep telling yourself, I am inadequate, it's going to come about in a self-fulfilling prophecy. However, if you can combat that lie, well, it is the truth, but if you can combat that with the reality that you're now worthy,
right,
like a new operating software, it's eventually going to delete over the old one.
Sure.
So the language in your head is no longer I am insufficient and inadequate, but it is I am worthy and I'm loved and I'm adored by God Almighty.
Right.
So, but that takes time.
Yeah,
it really does take time.
It absolutely does. And while we all are in that place where we've had moments, and now I understand that there are some people who just are constantly burdened with the idea of I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I can't do this. When you get to that place, that's when you want to give up. Now, we'll speak to that, but what I think my primary approach initially is for those who get stuck in a moment, so whether it's financial pressure or whether it's just the immense exhaustion that you experience with a newborn or whatever it may be, you find yourself at this point and you're just like, I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. I'm not qualified. I'm inadequate. It's when you get to that place, this is when you have the opportunity to remind yourself that, look, this is a season, this is a moment, and while you might not be, you've got hope. You've got hope to be because there is worth in you. You have worth and value because of Christ. So you can. You might not feel like you can, and you might be right to some extent now, but like you said, the next operating system, every upgrade, every period of change and growth, you're getting closer and closer and closer, but you'll never be the perfect dad. And that's never the goal. That's not the ambition. But as you get better, that is the goal, to just simply be a better dad every day. It is, even if it's, let's just take a random example, and let's just say you have a really bad temper, and every day you have an outburst in the morning as you're trying to get up to go to work and get the kids out to school, and you have another outburst when everyone gets home and it's time to have dinner and sit down and the kids are chaotic, and let's say you've got another one trying to get everyone to go to bed, and you're a 3 outburst angry dad 3 times a day. If you cut it down to 2, you're a better dad. It's still not great, but you're on the process, and that's ultimately the goal. We're not just trying to cold turkey from inadequate to all perfect and fully accepting.
And God doesn't place that expectation on us, so therefore we shouldn't place that expectation upon us.
And again, like what you said, while we do inherit this worth, it's important that we don't allow it to go to our heads the way that we can so easily do with other things. It's important that while we bear the worth of Christ, that we also do that with the humility and the perspective of Christ. I think of Philippians 2, who being in the form of God thought it not a robbery to be equal with God, but chose to make himself of no reputation and to be a servant. Like that was the perspective of Christ, bearing the worth that he had. So understanding that we have that worth, we should be very intentional about making sure that, we are approaching this with humility, and we're going to serve. Like we're going to follow in that path of serving our children as fathers, and that ought to be the goal. So with the acceptance thing, while it might take time, do your best to just make it a quick and easy thing. Yes, you're inadequate, and so is he, and so am I, and so is every other dad. Like we're all in this together. So just realize like this is a normal thing. It's not strange that you're underqualified. You have kids, you're able to do it. You might not feel qualified. Welcome to the party. But that's why we're forming community, so that we can do this thing together. That's the goal. That's the mission. So, and let me just reemphasize this one more time before we move to the next point that you've already kind of alluded to. Don't beat yourself up so much with, I'm not qualified for this, that you just walk out on the family and you just give up. Mm-hmm. Don't make that your pursuit. Don't make that your end game with your perspective. Mm-hmm. Fix that, because you can do this. There's worth and there's ability and there's potential, but with every kid, it's a new challenge. Mm-hmm. I have 3 kids, and my son is different than both of my girls, and both of my girls are different than each other, and they're at different ages, and they were all born in different families in a sense. My oldest, he's the firstborn. He had no other siblings around when he was around. Baby number 2, she had an older brother, so she got to learn from him. Well, baby number 3, she came around and had 2 older siblings, but these 2 older siblings really like to play with each other because they're older and on a different level where they can actually communicate and get along. And she's still at the goo goo gaga, kind of stumbling around. So she sees something that she wants to be a part of, yet very rarely gets accepted without some push from mom and dad to, hey, make sure you go play around with JoJo so that she doesn't feel so alone. So they all grow up in these different environments, and because of that, they all grow up a little bit differently, and they all require a little bit of a different approach. And so every time you have a kid, you're basically starting over with your approach to fatherhood. So yes, because you've never been there and you've never done that with each of your kids, you're starting out from a place of inadequacy. But you have to accept that. And with the acceptance of your current state, you have to embrace what's in front of you, embracing this call of fatherhood. So once you get to that place of, this is what I'm doing. I'm a dad, and I'm not perfect, but you know what? Every day I want to be a better dad. My first thing is you start learning. You've got to learn, and you can learn in various formats. You can learn by listening to podcasts. This one,
Fathering Our Future.
You can learn by reading books. There are videos of people talking about the topic on the internet, on YouTube, that you can listen to. Another good thing that you can do is just start meeting up with other dads that you are friends with, or even talking to older dads who have been there and done that. Get involved in community. I don't know if you have a particular style that you like when it comes to learning. I don't know. I know you really like to read. I don't know if you're more of a book person or what's been your go-to.
Certainly reading, but I have found community to be even more meaningful. Because there I'm stepping into real life and real life experiences, talking with people who have lived it before me and during me, and hearing of, the exciting times and the woeful times, the do's and the don'ts. I'm the kind of person who, if I can hear a story from someone else, which will then enable me not to hit the same brick walls as them, I'm going to hold fast to that and listen to it. And then also there is great wisdom that comes from parents, much older parents actually, who've just seen and lived longer and have been through it, because they have the perspective of time. We're stuck right now in this narrow window period of time. And so they help to remind us this is just one sliver of an entire piece of pie here. We're focusing so narrowly. And so particularly on this one slice that we fail to recognize the entire pie that's before us. And so that does help you when you get lost, when you get stuck. Another adage is, don't fail seeing the forest when you're stuck in the trees, kind of thing. And so you're living day to day focused on whatever X, Y, and Z is, and you forget to miss the big picture.
It's a huge change in perspective. You haven't been able to listen to the interview yet that I did with Jim, but he talked about how, what we're doing as dads is we're trying to equip our children to be able to function 50 years from now. It's just like, what? It's a huge shift. So talking to people who have been there, done that, who have lived much longer, and they have seen time retrospectively in a much broader sense than how we see it now.
Exactly.
It's a big thing.
And they know what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Especially if their situation is akin to our situation.
Sure.
We have a family in our church who has a daughter on the spectrum. You know them, Jonathan and Kayla.
Mm-hmm.
And their daughter is a few years older than our son Theo, but they've walked through this a little bit longer than my wife and I have, and we have learned many valuable lessons from them that have helped us to be more proactive. Part of the reason why our son is in therapy and doing some of the things that he's doing is because of what Jonathan and Kayla have already done.
Yeah.
We saw how it has worked, and we saw the wisdom in their decisions, and we listened to what they had to say, and it has helped propel us along even further. So again, I find great value in community and talking with people, and it just makes sense. If you're okay going back to more of a Christological approach.
Do it.
There's a reason why the authors of the New Testament call the church the body, a singular organism. We are, figuratively speaking, the body of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And if a member of the body dislocates itself, if an arm gets severed and remains unattached, it's going to die and wither because it's getting no nutrients, getting no blood. But if the member of the arm stays connected to the body, life comes as a result. So why not stay connected to community? Why not stay connected to the body? Because therein you find life.
Right. Exactly. And I like what you said early on about community. For me, I like to define it and describe it more of it's tangible. That's what it feels like, because as you read a book, a smart way of thinking about that is having a conversation with the author. Mm-hmm. While you might not be face to face with them, you're reading their opinion and their take on said subject.
Sure.
And you're able to think about it and make your observations and make your critiques and offer your opinion as a rebuttal. You might not be having the full discourse, but you are, in a sense, having a conversation with the author. But when you're in community, and this conversation can go on all day. Mm-hmm. We can constantly go back and forth and present nuances and tangents of the topic, and on we can go. And you get that in community. Mm-hmm. And like you said, staying connected. Mm-hmm. Yes, we cannot physically sit here all day and have a conversation because one, our wives would kill us. And I don't even need to give a number two. So you can't do that, but you stay connected so that over time you can consistently get together. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a text, sometimes it's a call, sometimes it's lunch, sometimes it's just when you happen to be at the same place where you're always at, like church, or if you work together. There's a number of variations to that, but staying involved and connected with people. Mm-hmm. And it's not always that you have to say, okay, look, I'm dealing with this, give me some help. Sometimes it's just like, man, the other day my kid did this and he is such an idiot. And then you can go and tell a story, and then from the story, which, it's almost like and maybe it's just me and just thinking about it right now, but it just feels like we've almost pulled away from storytelling so much. But storytelling, stories have morals, and there are so many principles that you can extract from stories, even real stories of things that happen, where you can think about it from a different perspective and you get a different view, and it allows you to incorporate change and to observe change. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's just, hey man, this is what's going on in my family. Mm-hmm. What about you? And it's never about, hey, I'm struggling with this.
Right. And sometimes for me, it's just the fact that you're there.
Oh, yeah.
Just being a sounding board.
Sure.
And having nothing to really say in response.
Yeah.
There's something cathartic and healing about just having someone there who's willing to listen and not even offer any suggestion.
Right. For me, part of that for me is when I have the opportunity to just talk about something, which this is why, I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but this is why I try to pray all the time, because I feel like I have a lot to get off my chest usually. But I always do that out loud, and I usually do it while I'm driving. Mm-hmm. Now you don't look like a crazy person, because usually anyone can talk through their car now. So we're like always on a conversation, except for I'm weeping. So that's odd. But no, but typically, I have this conversation out loud, or I have a conversation with an individual, And even if there's no response, it's just I've had the opportunity to think about everything that I'm going through in such a way where I have been able to come to terms with it, so much so that I've been able to verbalize it.
Right.
Now, when you can do that, you take the abstract and you give it some sense of a concrete feel.
Yeah.
And you, it's almost as if you do, in a sense, come to terms with some things. You might not have a solution and things might still be a disaster, but you have a better understanding of what you're going through because you had the opportunity to take the abstract and give it some form of solidity.
Right. Yeah, Jordan Peterson does a great job in making that same exact point. However, he'll use the analogy of an individual walking into a dark room and the fear that just immediately comes over you because you have no idea what's in there.
Sure.
But then he goes on to say that once you turn the light on, all that fear subsides because now you see everything. So the same is true whenever you write and talk out what you're going through and what you're living. Because by brain dumping it all out, you then see it and you give it form, you give it clarity. You are taking away the darkness that Peterson talked about, and you're flipping the switch and turning the light on.
That's cool.
So you're now able to see everything. You've removed the fear.
Yeah.
The monster's no longer under your bed.
That's a good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, again, there's something cathartic and healing about just simply speaking it and writing it down, talking it to somebody, because you're giving that abstract, nebulous fear substance.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing about community. I mean, some of those things you can do by yourself. Like you could sit down and you could write it all out.
Yeah.
Or you could pray, and you're technically alone when you pray, but you know what I mean? It's not, I'm seeing the other person. But there's something special about confiding in someone else too, because typically if you have good friends, which you should aim to have good friends in your life, if you confide in them about something, they tend to keep an eye on you. Not to, say, oh, they're doing that again, but to look for the opportunity to help you.
Right.
And that's a nice thing to have whenever you're dealing with whatever the issue is, and they observe something and they check in. You're just like, you know what? I'm not doing this by myself. And so the community aspect is so big. But let's give credit to some other guys who really help on the topic. Do you have any particular people? You mentioned Peterson, which clinical psychologist, considered an intellectual of our time, worthy of that title. I mean, he's pretty cool. I'd like to get him on the podcast. I'm working on it. But aside from Peterson, do you have anyone else that has been helpful, whether it's been reading or watching, in terms of fatherhood?
Paul David Tripp would be up there. I don't know if you've talked too much about him, but his book on parenting was a game changer. However, if you cannot endure the fact that you're the problem, don't read the book. Because he doesn't pull any punches. He will make it very clear that life is not about you and parenting is not about you.
Yeah.
And he is going to destroy the idea that, again, life's about you and that you're building your own kingdom.
Yep.
And so, again, if you're soft, I would not recommend reading it, but Paul David Tripp's book, that's hard to say sometimes, Paul David Tripp's book, Parenting, is a fantastic resource to pull from.
14 Gospel Principles?
Yes, 14 Gospel Principles,
Yeah, that's a good one. He has a lot of good things to say about parenting, fatherhood. So much of what he has said. One of the we'll not just spend time talking about Paul David Tripp, but one of the things that he said that I thought was so good that I had never really thought about before was on the topic of the talk with your kids, talking about sex. He said, so many people in church have been so cautious about bringing up the topic of sex because it's so sensitive in church. He said, but then the problem is your kids learn about sex from the culture and from their peers, and now they've got this really twisted idea of sex, and you should have been the one teaching them about the beauty of it from a biblical perspective. I'm just like, you just slapped all of us in the face with that, but that's a really, really good point. So that's kind of what the book is like. So just, prepare yourself, sit down when you read it, But yeah, Paul David Tripp is,
and take your time. It's not a book you want to read through quickly.
Yes. Yeah. But Paul David Tripp is a good one. That's who I had in mind. So I'm glad you mentioned him.
Yeah.
Other than that,
for me, it's typically watching successful parents. And
yeah.
what I mean by successful parents is you look at their kids and how they're living.
Mm-hmm.
And if those kids are living well, godly,
Sure.
morally, uprightly, then the parents must have done something if all their kids are living that way.
Sure.
Now, granted, we know Proverbs says, train up a child.
Yep.
And then the odds are they'll do well, but that's not always the case.
Right.
So you can't look at every parent. But as a rule, if a set of parents have a number of kids that are all living well, you want to take note. You want to sit down and have a cup of coffee or a meal with those parents and just ask them, man, what were some of the practices?
Right.
What were some of the things that were musts in your house growing up that you think aided in your children living so well today?
Right. And so I feel like a lot of times you can also look to families who have lots of kids. Mm-hmm. Now, not always, because I'm gonna eliminate the gray area here, but generally, if people have lots of kids together, it's because they thoroughly enjoy being parents and they're doing a good job at it. Otherwise, they wouldn't continue to have kids, or they're trying to start a cult. So it's one of the two. It's one of the two. So just be careful.
Yeah.
But like I think of some of the friends that I have who have 5 and 6 kids, and they're doing a really good job, and they're not afraid of the challenge of fatherhood or the challenge of parenting. And they continue to grow their family because they look forward to the challenge and they're approaching it from a good perspective. So it's another group to look at. But so with the whole embracing this call after you accept the fact that you're not fully qualified comes the learning phase. I mean, this is part of the embrace. You're not going to just hope that you happen to get by as a father. You're going to put in the effort. You're going to learn something, and then you're going to apply that knowledge to the best of your ability so that you can be a better dad every day. And really, being a better dad every day is not about you being better. It's about what you're instilling in your kids, because the better you are as a father, the better your kids will end up, likely.
Yeah, and I would add, what do you define as better? So again, this going back to Scripture, every individual, again, once faith is placed in Jesus, their primary calling is that of a disciple. And the definition or the thing that we're growing into, I guess is another way of saying, is growing in Christ, being more and more like Him. And so I would nuance the idea of fathering better to say, am I growing into and becoming more like Jesus?
Sure.
Because if I am, then of course I will become a better father.
Right. And from the Christian perspective, and I talked about a little bit way back when I did an episode on discipline, but it's been talked about both times when I've talked with Jim. He's very adamant. His big takeaway, again, PhD in family studies, but his big takeaway has been, as a Christian, I'm a disciple who's raising disciples.
Right.
That's what I'm doing. I'm growing into the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, and I'm taking them with me on the same path.
Right.
I'm trying to show them, this is God. This is what is worth doing. This is the call on each of us. So yes, very much so. Very much that perspective of I'm a disciple. I'm in the process of being discipled myself. But as it happens with me, I'm also carrying that on with my children.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah. You would hope that the stream is going down.
Sure.
Head being Jesus.
Yeah.
And it going down to you, to your kids.
Exactly. And it's very much so the struggle of men, especially with sons. You're not trying to raise your children in your image. You're raising them in His image.
Yep.
And so that's that discipleship mentality of, okay, this isn't about me, right? I'm in the same boat my children are. I'm just a little bit further along the path. So as I'm becoming more and more of a disciple, I'm trying to nurture them and help them on their path of discipleship to draw even closer to Jesus.
Correct. Yeah.
Like this is the whole goal. So yes, as Christian fathers, that is what we're doing. So we put forth an effort. We learn, we study, we do our best to draw closer to God, to learn more about Him, to read the Word, to pray, and to nurture our relationship on our discipleship course.
Mm-hmm.
And all along the way, we're taking things that we learn and we're trying to implement them with our children, or we're trying to teach our children these things. Now, we've dabbled in it all the way through, but let's just hit it home with this. Yes, we're all inadequate to begin with, and with every kid. I mean, again, I mentioned my kids. The same is true for you. Your oldest has autism. Your youngest does not. So you've got two different kids. You've got two different approaches. It's the first time you've ever raised a kid who didn't have autism, even though it's your second. And it's the same. Every kid is different. So we're never qualified right out of the gate, but we have this opportunity before us. So we embrace this call as fathers. We learn, but in every phase that we've dealt with, acceptance, learning, you've alluded to the third and final point, and that's God. He's a part of it all, beginning to end. Even in the acceptance phase of, yes, this is who I am, but this is who I am. I am in a relationship with Jesus, and because I have acknowledged him in faith, I receive the worth. You know, I'm holy because he's holy. I receive the righteousness of God because I have faith in God.
Right.
And so with that acceptance phase, God's part of it. And in the learning phase, ultimately going to the Christian perspective of fathers, of we're disciples raising disciples, God's right at the heartbeat of that because we're becoming disciples of him. So just to drive it home, this idea of inadequacies and learning, and you can still feel that you're coming up short in the process. Yes, we could learn a lot from Tripp and Peterson and Littles, who we often talk to about fatherhood. We can learn a lot from each other. We can learn a lot from the Bible, but we can still find ourselves in reality with our kids, experience the tension, and still think, it's not enough. I'm still not quite qualified or cut out to do this. But the point that we can elaborate on here is that when we have this gap, God will make up the difference. God has allowed us to have children, and we can have kids because we are able. We do bear the potential of being fathers. Right. Like, we can do this. His grace and his strength will enable us to do this. What would you add to God's role in fatherhood?
What would I add
with the inadequacies that we have? What would you contribute in addition to? Yes, we have the inadequacies. Yes, we're doing our best to learn, and yes, we might still come up short, but the difference that God makes in the process.
Yeah, I would say up there on that list concerning differences is that he's present and he promised to be there. And I'm immediately reminded of the early account of Genesis. Adam and Eve have already sinned and rebelled. And so now they, Cain and Abel, are just outside of the door. And we see God instructing the two sons to give, to worship. And God's presence when it happens. He accepts one and rejects the others, but God is still present, making up for what Adam and Eve cannot do.
Right.
And still, when one messes up, God comes and says, "Where are you?"
Yeah.
He's still very active and looking. Very present, always looking, always inviting.
Right.
Even in the midst of your child messing up, God's still there coming after, wanting and willing and ready to redeem and invite.
Right.
So I would have to say that that's key, that he's always there, always present, and doing far more than we can think or comprehend. If we think we have a grasp on God, God is very happy to circumvent our expectations.
Yes.
Very happy. Who would have thought that the redemption of all of the cosmos would be a man hanging on a tree?
Yeah. Yeah.
Something humiliating, detestable. but yet the powers were destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Sin's power was destroyed because of Jesus hanging on a tree.
Right.
God is perfectly happy circumventing. Joseph, that terrible ordeal he went through, and God elevates him to second in command
Right.
and restores and then saves Joseph's family.
Yeah.
God just redeems again and again, all because he's there. He's
Right.
present. He's always there, always working, always happy to work on our behalf, and on our behalf in ways that we can't even fully imagine.
Sure. So God is always present. And one thing that I would tag on to that is that understanding that he is present, we should always be willing to accept the invitation that he's extended to us. It's like, hey, yeah, we just made a bad mistake as a dad. God's there saying, hey,
yeah,
where you at?
Yeah, where you at?
Hey,
don't go
I'm
hiding.
right here.
Yeah,
I just made a mistake.
Yeah, don't stay in hiding, but come out and let the forgiveness wash over you. There may be consequences. There are always consequences, actually.
Sure.
But God's there, ready to redeem.
Right, and that's the thing. Part of redemption is God's not going to impose it on you.
Mm-hmm.
You accept the invitation.
Yeah,
and then you'll find redemption.
Mm-hmm.
He'll bring it to you.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's always been a great source of encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there are many days we don't feel it and we don't see it, that God is
Right.
there. But if God didn't forsake us when everything was going wrong on the cross, he's not going to forsake us now.
Sure.
When we're inadequate, when we don't know what to do, when our kids are messing up.
Right.
He didn't abandon us when he went through his worst. He won't abandon us when we mess up and go through our worst.
That's right. That's right. One more thing that we can address, and I think it has some application of what we're talking about with the inadequacies and feeling like we're coming up short. We talked about this the other day when we had lunch. You had a discussion with someone, and then we talked about the point, but this is in 2 Corinthians 12, I think, when the Apostle Paul says that he prayed for the thorn in his flesh to be removed. And he said he prayed 3 times, and finally God speaks, and he says, "My grace is sufficient." That's the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And what was beautiful about the idea is someone had told you that their perspective on that was, if I continue to pray for something that's personal about me, and God's not answering, then I take it as a sign that I could stop praying about that, because he's already given me the grace that's sufficient for that shortcoming or whatever it might be. And so I need to not so much pray about it for my selfish need, but I just need to accept the grace that he's given me. And I think that's just an incredible perspective on that passage. And so how I translate that over into what we're talking about today is, yes, we have inadequacies, and yes, there's probably always something that we could learn. Yeah, there's probably always a better understanding that we could have about child development. Yes, there's always more preparation that we could have done. But no one dad, no one individual is ever going to be able to do that. And even if they did accomplish that feat, when it comes game time, it's a totally different arena. It's not just a test where I'm just circling, oh, this is the right answer, this is the right answer. It's like, no, you're in battle now with this child, and it's totally different. You forget, or you react, or your humanity comes through. And to think that, yes, while I would love for God to step in and just help me to know more and help me to grow in this and help me to do that so that I can be a better dad and just, get me there right now, I have his grace, and that is sufficient enough.
Right.
And I think that idea is just so comforting that, God doesn't have to do some like crazy miracle that is just unrealistic to even pray about, to where, God, make me the perfect dad tomorrow, please. Let me wake up and just be the perfect father. It's never going to happen. Those shortcomings will always be there, but so will his grace.
Right. And what's beautiful about that grace that's sufficient is Paul is saying that God gives us grace that is adequate for the situation, that it's fresh tailor-made grace for that situation.
Yeah.
It's never something old. It's never something used. It's new. And like a suit that's tailored for a man or a dress for a woman, God is specifically handcrafting this grace to fit the exact need that you're walking in.
Yeah.
So it's always sufficient.
That's awesome. Yeah. And just to know that, to know that not only is God always present, and always looking, and always inviting, but He's always tailor-made this grace for you. And it's just waiting, and all we have to do is say, I hear you. Here come. I'm gonna have a seat at your table.
Yeah. And to go a little further, accepting that grace and laying aside what you're really wanting is not a downgrade or a lessening of faith. It's actually a maturing of faith. Sure. It's actually utilizing a more robust faith that I acknowledge God sees everything.
Sure.
And if He's saying not right now, the same that He did to Jesus in the garden when He prayed 3 times, then, we can really trust in the fact that He knows what He's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, every time you come on, if we're not talking about something specific to you and to your family, where it's more of an interview style and we're just going to talk about a topic together, God's going to be at the center.
Yeah, can't help it.
Can't help it. Have no other idea how to father outside of God being the heartbeat of that. But I think this is good, and I think for any dad who identifies as a Christian, I think it's important to know that, yes, you're a part of the body of Christ. So you've got community in your friends, you've got community in those around you, those at your church. There are plenty of people out there who are giving information, whether it's in the form of a podcast, whether it's written in a book, whether it is done in a conference setting or as a lecture or however else. Like, there are places that you can get information to help you overcome some of your shortcomings as a father. There's community that you can absolutely be a part of, and just having the consistent community is going to make a huge difference. And then throughout all of that, and at the very top of it all, is God. He is there constantly with you. You're never alone in what you're doing.
Right.
He sees your mistakes, yet He still invites you to sit at His table. And yes, He knows your shortcomings, but He's got this grace that's made just for you and just for your mistakes, and it will help you overcome every time.
Yep.
You got anything else to add?
I don't think I do.
Well, I think that's a wrap then. This is Fathering Our Future, the podcast for dads. I'm Anthony Vandegrift. It's my man, Derrick Weeks. Thank you for being with us, and I hope you'll join us next time. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, don't be shy. Please connect with Fathering Our Future on social media and become a part of the community that values fathers, that aims to help men love being dads, and to help dads be better dads every day, so that together we can better father our future.